President Trump leaves today for Beijing for a high-stakes summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and the war with Iran is overshadowing and perhaps influencing what would have been the major issues at play: trade tensions and China's designs on Taiwan. The president says the ceasefire with Iran is on, quote, life support. The Strait of Hormuz remains essentially closed, and Iran has not conceded to the president's demands for peace. Let's get right to CNN's Alayna Treene at the White House. You know, this trip has been on the calendar, actually moved, but for some time, a lot of desires to get things done here. But what does it play now?
Yeah, look, I think initially the White House, John, really wanted this to be a visit about trade and the economy, and also, you know, almost a watershed moment for these two leaders of these superpower economies. But so much of it is being now overshadowed by the war in Iran and also this longstanding dispute over Taiwan. But I do want to get into a little bit about what the White House wants this to be about. We know, of course, that really this bruising tariff fight between the U.S. and China has really dominated much of last year. But President Trump and Chinese Xi Jinping did agree to almost like this fragile truce last fall. And the White House wants to keep that relative calm moving forward. Now, we are told that their discussions when they meet face to face is part of it's supposed to be about, of course, the customary haggling over potential Chinese purchases of American products. That includes commercial jetliners and soybeans, and also proposal for a joint board of trade that would bring government oversight to a lot of the commerce between these two countries. We're also known they're expected, of course, to talk about tariffs and how to adjust them as they remain at a very high level. But again, a lot of this is also going to be dominated by what is happening in Iran. I'd remind you that China has seen a lot of high-profile leaders come to the country recently. We saw the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, met with his Chinese counterpart last week. Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected to travel to the country just days after President Trump departs. So a lot that is going on here for, you know, global geopolitics as well. And I think when it comes down to the Iran war, what's going to be very interesting is I spoke with a lot of my sources here at the White House yesterday about the latest of, you know, the president saying that this war, or the ceasefire rather, is on life support. I mean, it'll be interesting to see whether or not the president is going to ask for Xi Jinping to almost aid in bringing the Iranians to the table. We know that the Chinese have been very close in communicating with the Iranians throughout this entire process. So that could be another key part of this. We're just going to have to see. I am told as well that the president, who in recent days has been contemplating moving back to major combat operations with Iran, more than he has so in weeks, he is not expected to make a decision on how to proceed with the Iran war before departing for China. So a lot at stake here.
And an Iranian spokesman and advisor to the supreme leader apparently trolling the president ahead of that Beijing trip, saying, and I quote here, "Mr. Trump never imagined that by taking advantage of Iran's current calm, you will be able to enter Beijing triumphantly." What are you hearing from the White House about how, what is expected from this Beijing trip and how Iran might sort of feed into the narrative at this point?
Well, according to an administration official this weekend, they are going to bring pressure on Beijing when it comes to the war. Of course, they could serve as an effective interlocutor with the Iranians to try to drive them to the table. And a former senior official said that it is almost inevitable that Trump will be asking Xi Jinping for help on next steps. Now, of course, this is likely to overshadow a lot of this trip. Trump, of course, wanted this conflict to be wrapped up already before he went on this trip. He already had to postpone it once due to the war. Another former official said this is likely to suck up a lot of the social capital that he would have wanted to go in and speak to Xi Jinping about other issues. However, this is, of course, the most pressing one on the table. Now, in the lead up to his departure later today, we have seen the administration imposing sanctions on Chinese entities and individuals for what they say is support for the Iranian regime. China has been helping Iran when it comes to revenue and dual-use items. CNN also reported last month, if you remember, that intelligence was indicating that China was preparing to potentially ship defensive materials to Iran. So there is going to be a lot to discuss here and a lot to watch in terms of how much the president does push Xi Jinping to try to bring Iran to the negotiating table amidst all of these other deals that he is saying he wants to make while he's there.
So what role might China perhaps potentially play in any effort to find an end to this US war with Iran? And how would that work without emboldening China?
The Iranians are always very keen for China to play a larger diplomatic role in the region, and we did see it play some role last month in getting to the ceasefire. China wasn't, of course, the main mediator. Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, they played that role, but China helped at the very end, I think, to push the Iranians over the line, to convince them to accept the ceasefire. Would they want to go further than that? Can they go further than that now? It's not clear. They have some leverage over Iran as the main customer for its oil exports, but we shouldn't overstate that leverage. I don't think they can convince the regime to do something that Iranian officials see as fundamentally not in their interests right now. And then the Iranians would like to see China step in, perhaps to guarantee this deal, to offer promises that the Americans will respect it. The Americans will not, in the future, launch another round of fighting. It's just hard to see how China does that. They can't offer those sorts of guarantees. And historically, whenever there have been expectations that China will play a larger diplomatic role in the Middle East, it often doesn't meet those expectations. It doesn't want to be a diplomatic power yet in this region. I think it's very happy being an economic power, but leaving much of the mess of Middle Eastern diplomacy to other countries.
And on Sunday, President Trump rejected Tehran's response to his peace proposal, calling it totally unacceptable. Now his administration is imposing these sanctions on 12 companies and individuals that it says are helping aid the sale and shipment of oil from Iran to China. How might this impact Trump's meeting with Xi and any efforts to end the war?
I think it depends on how much further the Americans are willing to press this with China. I mean, as your correspondent mentioned, there haven't been any Chinese banks added to these sanctions lists so far. So if it's just this game of whack-a-mole, which the Americans have been playing for many, many years with China, going after front companies and in some cases going after the so-called teapot refiners, these independent refiners that turn Iranian crude into refined products. If that's all they're going to do, then we've been through this before, and it doesn't really, China will shrug this off and continue buying Iranian oil. If Donald Trump wants to push this further, he wants to start imposing broader sanctions on the Chinese financial sector or other parts of the Chinese economy, that would turn into a real clash at this summit in Beijing. But I suspect he also has other priorities. He wants to talk about trade. He wants to talk about economic deals. I think the last thing he wants to do is have this summit be overshadowed by some sort of sanctions war between the US and China over Iran.
Gregg Carlstrom in Riyadh, many thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Joining us now, CNN national security analyst Alex Plitsas with more on this. Let's start about this trip and what this means in the context of this moment with the Iran war. Alex, what role do you think China can play, could play, wants to play in bringing the Iran war to an end?
So China's got some competing interests here in the sense that if there was, greater economic damage or cause at the moment, I think you'd be seeing a more active role from President Xi Jinping. Made it clear from interlocutors in the region that the Iranian foreign minister speaks to his Chinese counterpart on a pretty regular basis. China imports a lot of oil. It does a lot of business. And so it becomes a question of when they intervene and if they do and why. So with the United States being tied up, we've also seen Chinese, precursors for weapons and things of that nature that have been coming in by ship. So it almost favors China to see if they can leave us there as long as possible until there's an economic impact, because we're expending a lot of munitions and things that may be needed for contingency operations in the Pacific.